Hey, welcome everyone to another episode of the Jonathan Project podcast, where iron is sharpening iron. And we help men navigate the complex world around them. And we take the inspiration between Jonathan and his good friend David as the inspiration for our show. And if you are seeking prayer, you found inspiration, hope from some of our previous episodes, and you would like to reach out to us, please contact us at the Jonathan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Again, the Jonathan Project Podcast at gmail.com. We also have a free men's devotional. That's something you can't find often nowadays. 28 days, 2 minutes a day, helps you become a better father and a husband. You'll also find that in the episode links. We have a great episode for you folks. We're excited. We have a very honored special guest, Dr. Mark Hitchcock. Welcome to the Jonathan Project. We're so happy to have you.
Great to be with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah. So, folks, I'm going to go ahead and give a quick intro of Dr. Hitchcock. He is a phenomenal man. He is the senior pastor at Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. He is world renowned for end times prophecy, giving us insights into what the Bible has to say about the world around us in the final season, as the Bible describes it. So we're honored to have him on the show here today. Dr. Hitchcock, again, welcome. Jason, welcome to the show as always.
Hey, appreciate it. Dr. Hitchcock, welcome. And thank you for being here. Understand also, as I was kind of looking you up a little bit, you also enjoy lifting weights. Walking is a good thing, but and I'm not big in golf, but I did notice you like lifting weights. So
I do, yes. It used to show more than it does now. The older you get, it's a little harder to keep it. But I still like doing it. Yeah, it's the weights have gotten a lot lighter and all that, but I still like it.
good. Awesome. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. And
I grew up in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. Great Christian family. Both my folks passed away last year, so I miss them a lot. But they led me to the Lord. I got saved. I was almost a month before I turned 6 years of age. Watching Billy Graham on television. Grew up in a great Bible church, and grew up here in Oklahoma City. Then I went to high school here. I went to Oklahoma State University, and then I went to law school. I was actually a lawyer for 4 years before I went to Dallas Seminary. I married my wife while I was still a lawyer, so I was telling everybody I did the bait and switch with my wife. She thought she was getting a lawyer and got a preacher. Anyway, we went down to Dallas Seminary down there, and have two sons. One was born right when I started seminary, one near the end. Then I went and got my PhD at DTS and have had the privilege to teach down there. Been at Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma for, and this October will be 34 years.
wow.
And got two boys, Justin and Sam. They're 36 and 34, both married, and we have 7 grandkids. Our one younger son's actually getting ready to adopt these 2 children in about a month. So that'll bring us to the 7.
That's awesome.
But anyway, I love my wife and I. We love to walk together and all that. I just walk so I can eat. Basically, that's what I do. You get older, you gain weight. You got to do something. So I just basically walking just so I can eat. So.
I feel like it's a kindred spirit. I work out to eat.
Yeah,
that's right. The truth, right?
Hey, that's
motivation.
That's a good program right there. Work hard, play hard.
I love the lawyer to prophecy. I really do. And so in truth, and you kind of got to help us connect those dots, because that's a big commitment. You're a lawyer, right? And I know when I was finishing my PhD, at one point I almost quit. I was like, I think I've had all the information they have to offer. I think I'm just going to call it a quit. And my wife gave me the famous knife hand. And she was like, you'll sit down and you'll finish it. And I was like, I don't know if that's how that works, but I'm not going to challenge this. And then when I finished, I was like, I think I'd like to go back to school. And her advice was actually to swap to law. If I did, that way I could represent myself at the divorce. So help me connect the dots from lawyer to prophecy.
Well, growing up, I knew the Lord as a young boy, like a lot of people from like 16 to 22. I didn't really live for the Lord. After my first semester of law school, I had a real dramatic turnaround, a 180 in my life. And, went ahead and was a lawyer for that period of time. But, I committed myself to the Lord, and I got a chance to teach 7th grade boys, and then high school group, and then in college class. And then when my wife and I got married, I was teaching our adult class. And it just became clear over time for myself and other people, confirmed that that's what God wanted me to do all the time. It wasn't that I disliked what I was doing. It was just a positive call, strong call to to leave. And so, we sold our house, sold everything, moved down to Dallas to go to Dallas Theological Seminary. But I mean, I've never doubted at one moment of my life ever that that's what God wanted me to do. So, never turned back. And, being at our church has been a wonderful place to be. Like every church, there's difficulties and things, different times, but by and large, I mean, for the 34 years, it's been a tremendous place to be and just a great blessing. And I'm in a good time of life right now. I've been there all that time and get to, do the teaching I do there at the church and do some writing and speaking other places. So, it's a blessed season of life that I really appreciate from the Lord. And, I appreciate the health I have as well.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. A lot of writing, 30 books, right?
Yeah. 30 something. Yeah. I'm working on a few things right now always, but I really enjoy that. And it's a good way to, get books out there. I get letters from inmates in prisons all the time that are reading books. I mean, once these books get in the prison system, they're there. I mean, it's amazing. And when a book gets published, where it ends up. So it's been interesting over the years, all the correspondence I've received about where people have found my books and read them.
Yes, sir. What was one of your first encounters with the end times prophecy? Speaking of, I know you spent a lot of time as far as like, let's say your theological focus, and you're well known. That's why we've had you on the show, and you've done a lot of other conferences and shows on prophecy. What was it that made you say, hey, this matters and people need to hear it? Because I think there's a lot of misnomers about, Christian prophecy, and people might have misconceptions, spooky kind of things about it. So what was it that hooked you and really helped you kind of put that message out there?
Well, it started back when I was around 11 or 12, something like that. I don't remember the age exactly, but in May of 1970, a book came out called The Late Great Planet Earth by Hal Lindsey.
Yep.
It was the number one selling book of the whole 1970s other than the Bible. Sold 27 million copies.
Wow.
It was a book that really just kind of shook America in a lot of ways. And when I was a young boy, everybody was reading it in the youth group. My sister was in the youth group. I remember looking through the book and just was fascinated by it. And there was a guy named Russ Doughton. I actually got to meet him years later. Made these movies. One was called The Thief in the Night, and they showed it one Wednesday night at our church. It was about the rapture. People just suddenly disappearing from the earth. And I remember, I don't know, again, I was around 11 or 12 years old, and I was just captivated by that. I mean, it was just, I'd never heard anything really like that. From then on, I was really interested in prophecy. It was kind of dormant for a while in my life, obviously. But when my life turned around in my early 20s, I met an elderly gentleman I studied the Bible with down in South Oklahoma City. And he liked prophecy, and I started reading some books. And what I realized is, that I couldn't really understand the Bible if I didn't understand at least something about prophecy, about end times. Because when the Bible was written, about 28% of the Bible was prophetic at the time it was written. Now, a lot of those prophecies have been fulfilled, but there's still many that are unfulfilled. So I realized if I'm going to really understand the Bible, I've got to understand God's prophetic program. And so I studied books like Daniel, the book of Revelation, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, the Jesus sermon on the Mount of Olives there in Matthew 24 and 25, and just really immersed myself, books like Ezekiel, to really understand prophecy. Really, my interest wasn't so much, hey, I want to become a prophecy expert. I just wanted to understand the Bible. And prophecy was really an avenue to understand the Bible better.
No, that's great, because I think as my father, who's a chaplain and listening to this in Ector County, Texas, what he kind of turned us on as growing up is having a heart to understand all the Bible and understanding that prophecy is really geared to have us have a heart for the present. And gives us that hope for that future, that, hey, things are going to work out. And when you can have that kind of hope sometimes, especially as men, when you think everything is going wrong, but you find that hope that, hey, we're on the winning team. Things are going to go right. And that really it's not about how it all breaks out and all these details I know a lot of people get hung up on, but it's really saying that relationship with Jesus Christ today is what matters. And I think that's that's a powerful, kind of story to put out there.
Well, when it comes to prophecy, though, too, you have to remember, though, I'm sorry, that there's a lot of, you mentioned all the details, but, there's a few basic things people believe, that have to believe if you believe the Bible. Jesus is coming back. There's going to be a literal resurrection of the dead. There's going to be a final judgment, and there's a literal heaven and hell. Now, we disagree, a lot of prophecy people do, about a lot of the details around all that stuff, but those are kind of the fundamentals or the pillars, of a eschatology or a view of the end times that's kind of orthodox. So sorry about that, Jason. I've stepped over you there.
No, it's absolutely fine. I was sitting there. I really do like how, Colby, you said that it's to give us a better understanding of the present And like you said, sir, is really, it's to help you understand the Bible. A lot of Christians may look at it like, why does it matter if I understand prophecy? Because if I'm gone when the rapture occurs, it'd be kind of like teaching people who pay their taxes on time, teaching them about tax evasion, right? Like
Mhm.
it doesn't apply. But I like how both of you kind of presented that.
Yeah, no, there's a great thought. Before God came and destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah, he came and talked to Abraham. And Abraham, said, God, if there's 50 righteous, there's 40, there's 10 righteous. Well, Abraham wasn't going to be there in Sodom and Gomorrah, but God came and told him what he was going to do there in Sodom and Gomorrah. And I always look at that as, we're God. Abraham's called the friend of God, and we're God's friends, and God wants us to know what he's going to do. And he
Yeah.
takes us into his confidence, and he shared with us what's coming so that we can live in light of it now, and to give us a sense of urgency and to pray for people, to want to see people come to know the Lord. So, even though we're not going to be here during that time, I believe a lot of these things that are happening in the future, God wants us to know about it and live today in light of it.
No, I think that's absolutely a good point. It's a sense of urgency. I was kind of thinking about, when I've been in aircraft and it's time to get out of those aircraft when they're in flight. Absolutely, as the countdown goes, I make sure all my stuff's set. Like
Mm-hmm.
I double check it. Although I've already checked it, I'll check it again. But it does provide that sense of urgency to make sure it's right for your buddy, and things like that. Do you also think that maybe understanding prophecy gives you a sense of calmness? Maybe it helps with anxiety. We talked a lot about, we see a lot of ramp up of anxiety in this world.
Well, yeah, Jesus, John 14, he said, don't let your heart be troubled, which means stirred up, that word does there. Don't let your heart be troubled. You believe in God, believe in me. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If it weren't so, I would have told you, I go to prepare a place for you. If I go and prepare a place for you, I'll come again and receive you to myself, that where I am, there you may be also. Jesus used prophecy and said, look, I'm going away, but don't let this world stir you up too much, because I'm going to come back someday and receive you to myself. And obviously, people may die before the Lord comes. Everybody in history's died before the coming of the Lord, but that's still the hope that when he comes, our bodies will be resurrected and reunited with our spirit. And so, that's the hope that we have. And in a world that looks like it's gone crazy, and it looks like a bus, going down the mountain with nobody at the wheel. When you study prophecy, and you can look at our world today and say, our world today is really set up just like the Bible said it would be before Jesus came.
Mm-hmm.
Look at that and say, all of these things can't be, the globalism that we see, and Israel being in the center of the world's attention, and the clamoring for peace over there, and all these different things we see happening, all those things couldn't be happening by accident. So to me, when you look at that and you see that, gosh, the Bible predicted these things in some cases thousands of years ago, gives you confidence that the Bible's true, that God's on his throne. God knows what's coming. And so, no, it does give a sense of real peace, because, and there's a lot to be anxious about in our world today.
That's a good point, Dr. Hitchcock, that you bring up. And it kind of ties back to, this question and thought that I've had. We talk about a lot here on our show of how to equip men to kind of step out into the boldness that God has. As you know, and I can speak to American culture the best because as all three of us, we all have lived it, served it in some kind of way, shape, or form. And there's a lot of pressure on men now not to be vocal, not to lead in the capacity that God has. And when we think about prophecy, it's a very divisive thing, as you said, for a lot of different reasons, for a lot of different folks, even in the church. But how do you think that neglect, and that's the best way I can put it, of men not fully diving into what the Bible is, and that is an understanding of prophecy, has left us kind of unprepared for spiritual leadership in this day and age where we really need that?
Well, the Bible tells us to be looking for that blessed hope and the glorious appearing of our great God and Savior. We're to be looking for it. Jesus said in Paul says in 1 Thessalonians 1, we're to be waiting up, for his son from heaven. It means to be like waiting up at night, for your wife to get home or your kids to get home. So if we're not doing that, we're not really obeying the Lord. And I think one of the ways that it's hurt men dramatically is they don't have a sense that Christ could come back at any time, and they're going to be accountable, and there's going to be rewards and lack of rewards given. Guys that are, looking at pornography or not treating their wife like they should, or not spending time with their children. And there's not, again, this sense that, Christ can come back at any moment. And I think people that don't live with that, at least somewhat in their life, or some thought of that, it's very easy for your life to lose a sense of accountability. Mm-hmm. That, you're just kind of living your life and you're kind of going along. Christ can come at any moment. You're going to get caught short. So I think it's really hurt people in that sense of just, there's a lot of things, that you might think about you're going to do. And you think, well, what if the Lord were to come back, or maybe something you're not doing that you should do. And so when you have that sense in our lives of the imminent return of Jesus, he can come back at any moment. I think it'll change the way that we live our lives. And it's a reality to us that Jesus really is coming back at some point in time. So I think a lot of men don't think about that, and I think that they're a lot worse off, because always in the New Testament, every time prophecy is mentioned, the coming of the Lord's mentioned, there's always practical application with it. I quoted John 14, don't let your heart be troubled. In 1 Thessalonians 4, at the very end of talking about the rapture, he says, comfort one another with these words. When someone dies that you love, it's a comfort. Jesus is coming back. In 1 John chapter 3, he says, everyone who fixes his hope on him purifies himself as he is pure. In other words, it has a purifying influence on us. And just one more I'll mention, 1 Corinthians 15:58, after talking about the rapture, he says, therefore, steadfast, immovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, knowing your labor is not in vain in the Lord. In other words, he's coming back. So get busy and use your gifts and serve him, because it's not going to be in vain. And he's going to come back. So it always has this motivation in our lives. And I think a lot of people who don't study prophecy, don't know about it, don't think about it, I think that they don't have that motivation and that passion in their life that I think it provides.
I think you said something that's really important. If you do study the prophecy and you do realize that Jesus is coming back at any moment, right? I think one of Satan's greatest diversions is we're so busy now, right? I love the writing, the paradox of progress, all these things that's supposed to create time saving, and we don't have any spare time. But it's almost like knowing where your North Star is, or what's coming, what's your fore compass. And if you don't understand prophecy and that Jesus is coming back, then you always think, well, there's tomorrow to get it right. And in reality, it may not happen. It could happen right now. That's why I drive my truck slow, in case I'm raptured. I don't want it to hurt anybody.
Well, no one knows how much time, I always like to say, none of us know how much time we have personally or prophetically. Personally, obviously something can happen to any of us anytime. And prophetically, we don't know how much time we have either. And so I think that to live with that idea, I think most people, though, are very, very earth-centered. They think about here and now. And, I think a lot of people think, well, prophecy is just kind of, pie in the sky, kind of sweet by and by kind of stuff. It doesn't really relate to everyday life. But again, every time it's mentioned, it's tethered to how you're living your life, now in the nitty gritty of life.
Well, I think it's pretty interesting when you go the end of time. People go, I don't really buy into it or whatever, right? And from a standing, if something has an ending, it had to have had a beginning. And a lot of physicists right now go, no, we absolutely agree. There was a point at which time began, and that's secular physicists as well as those that are biblically aligned, right? I think that's something that's super important. This will come to an end, not just personally, but all of it will come to an end at some point.
No, but I want to tie in another good point and then weave in something for you, Dr. Hitchcock. In the End Time Survival Guide, your latest book there, you introduce what you call the 46 defense. It was grounded in Philippians 4:6-7. How does that model help believers, men, women out there trying to understand what can feel like a very dense, complex subject, but that practicality of with chaos, the calmness that Jesus really wants us to have, that understanding that you described, and not have fear of the future, but have faith.
Well, yeah, Philippians 4:6, don't worry about anything. Don't worry, but in everything by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God that passes all understanding will guard. That's actually a military word. It means to build a fortress around. It's like put a guard around your heart and mind in Christ Jesus. And that's a great defense that we need. There's I mentioned this old guy I used to study the Bible with in South Oklahoma City. He was an old guy. He's kind of a corny old guy, but he loved the Bible, loved the Lord. But he said this saying one time, and sometimes these dumb little sayings stick with you. But he used to say, when in a fix, go to Philippians 4:6. And, it's just kind of a dumb little statement. I remember when I heard it, I was in my early 20s. But I've thought about that. I don't know how many times since then. It's a great place to go, that we go to the Lord in prayer, and God's peace can come and fill our heart and mind. And, we all need to be doing that constantly. We need to be going to the Lord in prayer, because we all have things that make us anxious. And we take those to the Lord, and the Lord can come and calm us and give us that garrison. I mean, build a fortress around our heart and mind in Christ Jesus. And we need that all the time. And we need to share that with our families. A lot of our wives need that. We need to help share that with. A lot of them worry about a lot of different things, and that's not good for them to be worried. We need to try to help them and encouraging them in that as well, but also be an example. Because if we're worried and fretting and anxious about everything, you're trying to tell your kids not to worry or your wife not to worry, it's going to fall on deaf ears. We have to set the example for that in our family.
No, I love that. And that's a great point that we've, hit a lot here on the Jonathan Project, is being that example, standing up like what God has called us to be, and to just be men, and to give a great example. But I want to pull on a thread that we're kind of hitting on right here, is that I feel like with prophecy, right, it's really quick and easy to fall into this trap. And I know you've probably seen it, Dr. Hitchcock, for sure, that people can get kind of weird. They get focused on, well, this person is the Antichrist, and then this sign's going to happen, and they're doing this prophetic connecting dots and in places. But really, what you said, and I really hope that everyone takes this away, is it's really a tool. It's a discipleship tool. It's really something to ground you in practicality and understanding in the Bible, more than just intellectual curiosity. So how can people do that? How can men, women out there listening to us really understand that this is about discipling, helping others around them, and not just this weird curiosity of this kind of thing of the Bible?
Yeah, being a prophecy guy myself, I get a lot of weird stuff sent to me. There's people that, they know who the Antichrist is. They've counted the, hairs in the Antichrist beard or whatever, and they know what country he's coming from, or, even people that, they know the day he's coming back, even though Jesus didn't know when he was on earth. I think he knows now, but he says, he didn't even know in his incarnation. So that's a pretty bold statement to make. They know something Jesus didn't know, I always say when somebody sets a date for Jesus coming, that's not the date, when he's coming back. And I don't think we'll see the Antichrist. He's going to rise, after the rapture takes place, is my view. So, there's all kinds of views out, all kinds of things that people get caught up in. But I think, to just focus on the main things about prophecy, that Jesus is coming back. There are signs of the times, things that are happening. In Matthew 24, Jesus' disciples asked him, when are these things going to be? What's going to be your sign of the coming and the end of the age? He didn't say, well, don't worry about it. He gave them a bunch of signs. So there are things that we can look at in our world. But I think that what we need to do, as men and leading our families, I think it's a good thing to teach your kids about prophecy. Look,